The engine growls. The driveway is blocked, and the woman leaning against that SUV has no idea what's sitting in the barn, or what happens when a man who spent 30 years farming this land finally runs out of patience. Corbin Hale had never considered himself a man prone to rage. He was the kind of person who let things slide: the neighbor's dog digging up his garden beds, the delivery trucks that parked half on his gravel without asking, the slow creep of suburban development that had swallowed up the farmland on 3 sides of his property over the past decade. He had watched the old Mercer fields become a cul-de-sac called Whispering Pines Court. He had watched the Delacroix pasture become a gated community called Briarwood Estates. He had smiled politely at every ribbon cutting, every welcome wagon, every cheerful flyer stuffed into his mailbox announcing the formation of the Briarwood Estates Homeowners Association and its elected president, a woman named Denise Calloway. He had filed the flyer in the recycling bin. His property was not part of Briarwood Estates. It never would be. The Hale Farm, 63 acres of pasture, woodlot, and cultivated field, sat at the edge of the development like a splinter the HOA couldn't quite remove, bordered on the south by a 2-lane county road, and on the north by a creek that had marked the property line since his grandfather's time. The farm had been there for 81 years. Briarwood Estates had been there for 4. That distinction had not prevented Denise Calloway from making his life difficult. It had started small: a certified letter informing him that his fence line along the development's eastern border was aesthetically inconsistent with community standards. He had thrown that away too. Then a complaint filed with the county zoning board about the smell during fertilizing season. The board had dismissed it in under 10 minutes. Agriculture was protected use, and Corbin had the permits to prove it. Then a petition, signed by 47 Briarwood residents, requesting that the county reclassify his land as residential to enhance neighborhood cohesion. That one had actually made it to a hearing, and it had cost him $600 in attorney's fees to defeat, but defeat it he had. Through all of it, Corbin had been polite. He had been measured. He had spoken to his attorney in calm, even sentences. He had not raised his voice at the zoning board hearing when Denise Calloway stood at the podium and described his farm as a blight on the community's quality of life. He had simply sat there, hands folded on the table, and let his lawyer do the talking. He was 54 years old. He had buried his father on this land and scattered his mother's ashes near the creek. He had raised his daughter here and watched her leave for college and then for a city 3 states away, and he didn't blame her for going, but he felt the absence like a tooth pulled from the jaw. The farm was what remained. The farm was what he understood. He was not going to lose it to a homeowners association. On a Tuesday morning in late October, Corbin woke at 5:30, as he always did, and made coffee in the old percolator his mother had kept on the same burner for 30 years. He drank it standing at the kitchen window looking out at the fields, which were bare and brown now after the soybean harvest, the rows stretching away into the gray pre-dawn light. His old border collie, Gus, sat beside him and leaned against his leg with the comfortable weight of a dog who had been doing this for 11 years. He had a delivery scheduled for 9 o'clock. A seed supplier from 3 counties over, a man named Travis Odom, was bringing a truckload of winter cover crop seed, rye grass, and crimson clover, and Corbin needed to get the grain barn door open and the storage area cleared before Travis arrived. It was a routine morning. He had done it 100 times. He pulled on his boots at 6:15 and walked out through the mud room into the gray October air. The farm was quiet except for the sound of crows in the tree line and the distant low of cattle from the pasture to the west. He walked the gravel path from the house to the equipment barn, where his John Deere 6120M sat in the half-dark, green and massive and reliable as anything he owned. He had bought it second-hand 8 years ago and maintained it himself, and it started on the first turn every single morning. He spent the next 2 hours clearing the grain barn, moving pallets and shifting equipment, working steadily and without hurry. At 8:40, he walked back to the house to wash his hands and get a second cup of coffee before Travis arrived. He came around the corner of the house and stopped. Denise Calloway's white Cadillac Escalade was parked directly across his driveway. Not on the county road, not on the gravel shoulder, directly across his driveway, perpendicular to the gate, blocking it completely. The vehicle was locked, engine off, no one inside. He looked up and down the road, no sign of her. The Escalade sat there like it had been placed with deliberate intention because it had. Corbin stood for a moment looking at it. He checked his watch. 8:43. Travis Odom's delivery truck would be here in 17 minutes. Travis was punctual to the point of religion. The man had once called ahead to apologize for being 2 minutes late due to a train crossing. The delivery required a straight-through pull into the farm lane and around the barn, and the lane was exactly wide enough for Travis's flatbed. There was no alternate route. The delivery could not happen with the Escalade where it was. Corbin pulled out his phone and called Denise Calloway. She answered on the fourth ring, and he could hear from the lightness in her voice that she had been expecting his call. "Good morning, Corbin." "Denise, your vehicle is blocking my driveway." "Is it?" She paused. "I must have parked in the wrong spot. I'm so sorry." "I need you to move it. I have a delivery in about 15 minutes. "Oh, I'm not sure I can get there that quickly. I'm in the middle of something." He took a breath. "Where are you?" "I'm over at the community center. We're setting up for the fall festival. You know, the one we invited you to. You never responded to the invitation, which was a little rude, but I understand you're very busy with." "Denise," his voice was even and low, "move the vehicle. I'll try to get over there when I can, maybe 40 minutes, an hour." The call ended. He was not sure whether she had hung up or he had. He stood in the driveway looking at the Escalade and thinking clearly and without emotion about the situation in front of him. He called Travis Odom and told him the delivery would need to be delayed. Travis said no problem, he'd grab breakfast in town, and they rescheduled for 11. Corbin thanked him and put the phone in his pocket. Then he walked to the equipment barn and climbed into the John Deere. He was not thinking about consequences in that moment. He would think about them later, at length, and with considerable attention to detail. What he was thinking about in that moment was the simple, practical problem of a vehicle that was parked where it had no business being, on a lane that belonged to him, in front of a gate that opened onto his property. He thought about his grandfather, who had cleared this land with an axe and a team of horses, and a stubbornness that had apparently been passed down intact through 3 generations. He thought about the $600 he had paid his attorney. He thought about the certified letter describing his fence line as aesthetically inconsistent. He started the tractor. The John Deere rolled out of the equipment barn and down the gravel path toward the gate. The loader bucket was already mounted. He'd been planning to use it for barn work that afternoon, and he lowered it slightly as he approached, angling it with the casual precision of someone who had spent 30 years operating this machine in tight quarters. He did not ram the Escalade. He was not reckless and he was not impulsive, and he understood the difference between making a point and destroying someone's property. What he did was this. He guided the bucket under the front bumper of the Escalade with a steadiness that surprised even him, applied just enough lift to bring the front wheels off the ground, and then drove forward at 2 miles per hour, pushing and nudging the vehicle across the gravel until it sat neatly on the road shoulder 15 feet to the left of his gate, still facing the same direction, entirely undamaged and completely out of his way. The whole operation took 4 minutes. He lowered the bucket, straightened the tractor, and went back to the barn. He did not know that the 12-year-old boy from the house directly across the county road, Marcus Chen's youngest, a kid named Oliver who was home sick from school and bored out of his mind, had been watching from his bedroom window the entire time and had filmed all 4 minutes on his tablet. He did not know that Oliver had immediately sent the video to his older brother in college, who had posted it to 3 different platforms within the hour. He found out when Travis Odom arrived at 11 and climbed out of the cab laughing so hard he could barely unhook the flatbed. "Brother," Travis said, wiping his eyes, "you are currently the most famous farmer in this county, possibly this state." Corbin looked at him. "What are you talking about?" Travis showed him his phone. The video had 40,000 views. The title someone had put on it read, "Farmer MOVES HOA President's Escalade with Tractor Doesn't Miss a Beat." The comment section was a scroll of people losing their minds with joy. Corbin watched the 4-minute video of himself operating his own tractor in his own driveway and felt nothing in particular about it except a low-grade awareness that the situation had become more complicated. "Is this a problem?" Travis asked. "Don't know yet," Corbin said. They unloaded the seed and stacked it in the grain barn, and Travis drove away still grinning, and Corbin went inside and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what would happen next. He was a methodical person. He considered scenarios in order of likelihood. Scenario 1, Denise Calloway would call him screaming. Scenario 2, she would call the police. Scenario 3, she would call her attorney. Scenario 4, all 3 in that order. His phone rang at 1:17. He didn't recognize the number. "Is this Corbin Hale?" A man's voice, professional and measured. "It is." "My name is Philip Garrett. I'm an attorney representing Denise Calloway of Briarwood Estates. I'm calling to inform you that my client intends to pursue civil and potentially criminal charges related to the unauthorized movement of her personal vehicle this morning. We believe this constitutes trespass to chattel, and depending on any damage assessment, potentially criminal mischief. I'd advise you to retain counsel." Corbin was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Garrett, was your client's vehicle on my property?" "She parked on a public right-of-way." "She parked across my driveway, across my gate. I have photographs." A pause. "Mr. Hale, I also have photographs of the no parking signs posted at that gate, which have been there for 11 years. I also have a recorded call from this morning in which your client told me she was aware the vehicle was blocking my access and declined to move it. I also have a delivery driver and a seed invoice that document the commercial access she obstructed." Another pause, longer this time. "I'd suggest," Corbin continued, in the same even voice he had used at the zoning board hearing, "that before your client files anything, you review those photographs and that recording. And I'd further suggest that she become familiar with the county ordinance on obstruction of private access points, because I already am." He hung up. He sat in the kitchen for a while longer. Gus came and put his head on Corbin's knee, and Corbin scratched him behind the ears absently. Outside the window, the October fields lay quiet and brown. A hawk was circling over the tree line to the north. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter, Wren, who was an environmental attorney in Portland and had somehow already seen the video. It read, "Dad, what did you do?" He replied, "Moved a vehicle that was blocking the gate." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. "The internet is losing it. Also, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" "I'm fine," he wrote back. "Have it handled." He wasn't entirely sure that was true, but he had been farming this land for 30 years through droughts and floods and commodity crashes, and one spectacularly bad year when a late frost had killed the entire soybean crop, and he'd had to borrow against the property to cover his operating costs. He had not lost the farm then. He did not plan to lose it now. What he didn't know yet, what none of them knew, including Denise Calloway, was that the video had reached someone else that afternoon. Someone who had been looking, for reasons entirely unrelated to tractors or driveways or homeowners associations, for exactly this kind of story. Her name was Nora Fitch, and she was a documentary filmmaker in Chicago, and she had been developing a project about rural land rights for 2 years without finding the right entry point. She watched the 4-minute video 3 times. Then she opened a new browser tab and started searching for Corbin Hale. By 4 o'clock she had found the zoning board records, the HOA petition, the certified letter about the fence line. The pattern was unmistakable, and it was the kind of pattern that made for extraordinary film. She booked a flight to the nearest regional airport for Thursday morning. Corbin was in the equipment barn running maintenance checks on the tractor when his phone rang again at 5:47. He almost didn't answer it. He was tired and he had a long evening ahead, and he had already had more phone calls today than he typically had in a week. But he answered, and it changed everything. Denise Calloway did not call that afternoon. She did not call that evening. In her house in Briarwood Estates, in a kitchen that smelled of scented candle wax and Keurig coffee, she was sitting at her kitchen island with her phone in her hand, scrolling through the comment section of a video that had now crossed 80,000 views, reading words about herself that made her face go from red to white to a deep, purpling shade of mortification. She was not a stupid woman. She was calculating and socially fluent, and she had run the Briarwood HOA for 3 years with an iron consistency that she privately believed the community needed and publicly described as dedicated stewardship. She had dealt with dozens of neighborhood disputes, barking dogs, unapproved paint colors, basketball hoops left in driveways, and she had prevailed in nearly all of them through a combination of persistence, documentation, and the willingness to escalate. Corbin Hale had been different from the start, and she had known it, and she had pushed anyway. Because his farm sat at the edge of her development like a rebuke. Because the smell of it drifted over the fence on hot days. Because his equipment moved on the county road at 5 in the morning and sometimes woke the families on the eastern end of the cul-de-sac. Because he had never once attended a community meeting, or acknowledged a single letter, or behaved as though the existence of Briarwood Estates was anything other than a minor inconvenience he was waiting to outlast. Because she wanted that land. Not for herself, not directly, but for the development, for the expansion that the HOA board had been quietly planning for 2 years. The Phase 2 that would add 46 new homes and a community pool and a second entrance off the county road, all of which depended on acquiring the Hale property. She had thought the pressure campaign was working. She had thought a man living alone, farming alone, with no family left on the property and no real community ties, would eventually conclude that the hassle wasn't worth it. She had miscalculated. She had badly miscalculated, and now 80,000 people on the internet were calling her a Karen. And her attorney had just texted to say that Corbin Hale apparently had recordings of their phone call and photographs of her parking, and was aware of the county obstruction ordinance, and she needed to think carefully about her next move. She put the phone face down on the island. She thought carefully. The problem, she realized, was not the tractor. The tractor was embarrassing, but embarrassment passed. The problem was the video, and the video's strange power to show, in 4 wordless minutes, the entire dynamic she had worked to keep invisible. A man moving something that was in his way. Nothing more than that. And yet the internet had looked at those 4 minutes and drawn conclusions she could not argue with because they were entirely correct. She needed to get ahead of this. She needed a counter-narrative. She needed to be the reasonable party, the community-minded neighbor who had merely parked in the wrong spot and been met with aggressive confrontation. She picked the phone back up and called a woman named Stacy Briggs, who ran the Briarwood Community Facebook page and had once described Denise as the backbone of this neighborhood, in a post that had received 212 likes. "Did you see the video?" Stacy asked immediately. "I saw it," Denise said. "I need to talk to you about what actually happened." There was a pause on Stacy's end that Denise didn't like. "Denise, I have to be honest with you. I've been getting messages all afternoon. People from the neighborhood. Not all of them are on your side with this." That's because they only saw the video. They didn't hear his tone on the phone. They didn't see how he He moved the car without damaging it, Stacy said. That's what people keep saying. He moved it without damaging it. He was calm. She stopped. He looks like the reasonable one, Denise. The line was quiet for a moment. Help me, Denise said. The word came out smaller than she intended. But Stacy Briggs had been watching her phone for 3 hours, and she had read enough comments to understand something that Denise had not yet accepted. The story had already been written, and they were not the authors. Corbin, sitting in the equipment barn at 5:47, answered his phone without knowing any of this. He heard a woman's voice, direct and professional. Mr. Hale, my name is Nora Fitch. I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Chicago. I've been following the situation with your property and your HOA for a while, and after today, I'd very much like to speak with you. I think there's an important story here about rural land rights, and I think you're at the center of it. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the barn, the October evening was going dark, and the first stars were appearing above the tree line to the east. How long have you been following it? He asked. Long enough to have read every zoning board filing, she said. Long enough to know this didn't start this morning. He looked at the tractor sitting in the half-dark. He looked at Gus, who had followed him into the barn and was lying near the rear wheel with his chin on his paws. All right, Corbin said. Tell me what you have in mind. Nora Fitch arrived Thursday morning in a rented sedan with a camera assistant named Dell and a sound engineer named Priya, and she drove up the county road to the Hale farm with the careful attention of someone who had been imagining a place for months and was now measuring it against the reality. The farm was exactly what she had hoped and more: the old farmhouse with its wide porch, the equipment barn with its weathered siding, the bare October field stretching away to the tree line, the handmade no parking signs on the gatepost that looked like they'd been there since the Reagan administration. Corbin met them at the gate. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of deliberate quietness that Nora had learned to recognize in people who had spent their lives in physical work. A stillness that wasn't passivity but rather a conserved energy, held in reserve for when it was actually needed. He shook her hand firmly and looked her in the eye and said he'd made coffee if they wanted some, and they did. They spent Thursday morning at the kitchen table. Nora had brought the zoning board records, the HOA correspondence, and printouts of 3 separate complaints Denise Calloway had filed with county agencies over the past 4 years, all of them dismissed. She laid these out in front of Corbin and watched his face as he looked through them. Not surprise, since he had lived through all of it, but something else, a kind of grim recognition that comes from seeing your own experience documented by someone else's research. She's been building a record, Nora said. Not against you, against the property. The complaints aren't really about the smell or the noise or the fence line. They're about establishing that this land is problematic, that it needs to be recategorized, that it's incompatible with the surrounding development. I know, Corbin said. The Phase 2 documents aren't public yet, but I found a reference in a Briarwood Estates board meeting minutes from 8 months ago. They call it the Eastern Acquisition. They don't use your name, but the coordinates are your property. He was quiet for a moment. He poured more coffee into her cup without asking, and she appreciated that. They want to buy me out, he said. Or push you out, Nora said. The complaints are the first phase, make the property legally vulnerable, make your operating conditions difficult, wear you down, then make an offer when your position is weakened. What's the offer worth to them? At current residential development rates for this county, your 63 acres would be worth somewhere between $4 and $6 million to a developer. She paused. Have they ever made you a formal offer? Not formally. Denise Calloway mentioned at the zoning hearing that the HOA would be interested in discussing a voluntary sale. I told her no. She mentioned it at a public hearing. She did. Nora looked at him steadily. "Mr. Hale, do you understand what we're dealing with here?" "I think I'm starting to," he said. Dell was already moving through the house with a camera, shooting the framed photographs on the wall of Corbin's grandfather with the original team of horses, his parents at the farmhouse door in some year in the 1970s, a younger Corbin with a toddler-aged Wren in the cab of a tractor, not intrusively, not dramatically, just recording the evidence of time layered into a place. Priya was outside with a portable recorder, capturing the ambient sound of the farm, the wind in the bare fields, the distant cattle, the creak of the equipment barn door. She had been doing this kind of work for 12 years, and she had a feeling about stories before they fully revealed themselves, and she had a very strong feeling about this one. On Thursday afternoon, Nora asked Corbin if he would be willing to do an on-camera interview. He sat in the kitchen with his hands folded on the table and answered her questions in the same even, measured tone he apparently applied to everything. And what emerged over 90 minutes of conversation was a portrait of a man who was not angry so much as resolved, who had made a decision long ago about what mattered and had simply been defending it ever since. He talked about his grandfather breaking the ground. He talked about his father modernizing the operation in the 1980s. He talked about the years he had farmed alone after his wife, Clara, had died of cancer 9 years ago, and how the farm had been the thing that kept him anchored when he might otherwise have come apart. He talked about Wren, who called every Sunday and asked about the fields and the cattle with the attention of someone who loved a place she could not stay in. He did not perform any of this. He did not seem to be aware that it was affecting. Nora Fitch, who had made 3 documentaries and interviewed hundreds of people, and had a professional discipline about maintaining emotional distance from her subjects, found herself thinking that she had never encountered anyone quite like him. "When you moved the Escalade," she said carefully, "what were you thinking?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about the delivery. I was thinking about the cover crop that needed to go in before the ground froze. I was thinking practically, not emotionally." He considered this. "I was calm when I did it, but I won't pretend there wasn't something satisfying about a situation that had a simple solution." He paused. "Most of the situations she's put me in didn't have simple solutions. This one did." "Do you regret it?" "I regret that it went online, not the act itself." She nodded. "Why do you regret it going online?" He looked past her toward the window. The afternoon light was going golden. "Because now it's a story, and I don't particularly want to be a story. I want to be a farmer." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I think the only way to protect this farm at this point might be to let it be a story, a bigger one than what's already out there." He looked at her directly. "That's why you came?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. Gus got up from under the table and went to the back door, and Corbin got up to let him out, and he stood for a moment at the open door looking at the farm in the late afternoon light, and then he turned back. "All right," he said, "tell me what you need." What Nora needed was time and access, and the kind of cooperation that most people, when they finally understood what documentary filmmaking actually involved, became reluctant to provide. She needed him to be willing to be filmed during his daily routine, to be present for conversations with his attorney, to allow her to attend and record whatever came next in the Callaway dispute. She needed him to be honest with the camera in ways that most people found uncomfortable. He gave her all of it. They spent Friday on the property, shooting the farm in morning light and afternoon light, following Corbin through his day as he moved equipment and checked fences and fed the cattle and ran the tractor through the empty field in a straight, deliberate line. Dell shot him from a distance against the wide, pale sky, and Nora watched the monitor and felt something she recognized as the documentary equivalent of finding your structure, the shape of the thing finally becoming visible. On Friday afternoon, Corbin's attorney, a woman named Rosalind Park, came to the farm for a meeting that Nora was permitted to attend but not film. Rosalind was a property rights specialist who had handled the previous HOA challenges and who had, Corbin told Nora beforehand, a particular dislike for homeowners associations that Rosalind herself had once described as a professional allergy. Rosalind spread documents across the kitchen table and explained the situation with the precision of someone who had been thinking about nothing else since the tractor video. The obstruction of your driveway was a violation of County Ordinance 14B, which prohibits blocking private access points. Corbin has the photographs and the phone recording. Denise Calloway has no viable civil claim against the property movement because the vehicle was on an access point he owns, and he moved it without damage. Philip Garrett knows this. I spoke to him this morning, and he was considerably less aggressive than I expected, which tells me he's already advised his client that her position is weak. So she can't sue, Corbin said. She can always sue. Anyone can always sue. She just can't win. Rosalind paused. What concerns me more is the Phase 2 development plan. If what Nora has found is accurate, and I've looked at the board minutes and I believe it is, there's a coordinated effort here that may cross into harassment. 3 zoning complaints in 4 years, all dismissed, all filed shortly after Corbin declined to discuss a voluntary sale. That pattern is documentable. What does documentable mean? Corbin asked. It means we could potentially file a civil harassment claim against the HOA and against Calloway personally. It also means that if they pursue the rezoning effort, we have grounds to challenge it as retaliatory. Nora was taking notes. She looked up. Would you be willing to file? I'm advising it, Rosalind said. The timing is actually good. The video has drawn attention to the situation, and attention has a way of making people reconsider their strategies. Corbin looked at the table. He looked at his hands. File it, he said. Rosalind nodded once efficiently and began organizing her papers. Outside, the October afternoon was fading into evening, and the fields were going dark, and the farm was exactly what it had been for 81 years, present, solid itself, and Corbin Hale sat in his kitchen with his dog under the table and his attorney beside him, and a documentary filmmaker across from him, and he felt the ground beneath him shift in a way that was not threatening but preparatory, like the ground before planting, turned and opened and ready for what was coming next. He didn't know yet what that was, but he was going to find out. And so was Denise Calloway. The civil harassment filing hit the county courthouse on Monday morning, and Denise Calloway's attorney called her at 9:17 to tell her about it. And she sat down in her kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear and felt the exact specific sensation of a situation that she had believed was under control revealing itself to be the opposite. Philip Garrett read her the key language: coordinated harassment, pattern of retaliatory complaints, interference with protected agricultural use, intentional obstruction of commercial access. Can they prove it? She asked. They have the complaint filings. They have the timing. They have the zoning board records showing all 3 complaints were filed within 60 days of Mr. Hale declining to discuss a voluntary sale. He paused. They also have a phone recording from Tuesday morning in which you acknowledged awareness that your vehicle was blocking his access and stated you couldn't move it for 40 minutes to an hour. She closed her eyes. And Garrett continued, with the particular tone of a man delivering news he would rather not deliver. There's a documentary filmmaker who arrived at the Hale farm Thursday morning and has apparently been given full access. A documentary filmmaker. Named Nora Fitch. She has 2 completed documentaries on rural land rights issues. One of them ran on PBS. Denise opened her eyes and looked out her kitchen window at the street. A child was riding a bicycle past. A delivery van was double parked outside number 14. The street was impeccably maintained, the lawns uniformly edged, the houses a coordinated palette of approved exterior colors. Everything was exactly as it should be. "What do we do?" she asked. "We have several options," Garrett said carefully. "We can contest the filing and prepare for litigation, which will be expensive and will take place on the public record during a period when your actions are already receiving significant attention online. We can pursue a settlement, which will require acknowledging some version of wrongdoing. Or," he paused, "or we can consider whether there's a way to address the underlying situation that removes the conflict entirely." "You mean buy the farm?" "I mean make a genuine offer, a fair one, not as pressure but as resolution." She was quiet for a long time. "He's not going to sell," she said. "I've known that for 2 years." "You knew that when your approach was pressure and complaints. His circumstances may be different now." "His circumstances are that he has 80,000 people on the internet cheering for him, and a documentary filmmaker sleeping in his guest room." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "That's a fair point," he said. She hung up and went to her computer and looked at the video again. It had crossed 300,000 views overnight. The comments were worse than ever, not just calling her a Karen, which she had come to expect, but making specific references to the HOA's development plans that she had not realized were findable in public records. Someone had done research. Multiple someones. The comment section had become a crowdsourced investigation, and it was surprisingly accurate. She felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. Not regret, not exactly, but a kind of recognition. The slow, unwilling understanding that she had mistaken her own determination for rightness, had told herself so many times that she was acting in the community's interest that she had stopped examining whether that was actually true. She thought about the Phase 2 plan. She thought about the 46 houses and the community pool and the second entrance. She thought about the presentation she had given to the Briarwood board, the enthusiasm in that room, the vision of a completed community that would have looked exactly like what she had always imagined a community should look like. She had never once in all of that thought about what it meant to take an 81-year-old farm off the land. She had thought about the farm as an obstacle, as a problem to be solved, as a negotiation to be won. She had not thought about what it was. She opened her browser and typed Corbin Hale's name. The search returned the video, a county property record, and the documentary filmmaker's website. She clicked on Nora Fitch's name and read the description of her previous project, a film about a Nebraska family fighting eminent domain for a pipeline easement. She watched the trailer. It was 3 minutes long. By the end of it, she had a very clear picture of how Nora Fitch told stories and where she placed the moral weight in them. She sat in her kitchen for a long time after that. On Monday afternoon, she got in her car. Not the Escalade, she had taken it to the dealership for a full inspection the morning after the video, half convinced that Corbin had damaged it somehow, and the technician had looked at her with undisguised amusement and told her there wasn't a mark on it. She got in her Honda and drove to the county road and turned north and stopped at the gate of the Hale farm. The gate was open. A car she didn't recognize was parked near the house. She sat in the Honda for a moment, then she got out. She walked up the gravel path to the house and knocked on the door. After a moment, the door opened, and she was face to face with Corbin Hale for the first time since the zoning board hearing 18 months ago. He was bigger than she remembered, or maybe she had not really looked at him carefully before. He looked at her with an expression she could not read, not hostile, not warm, just attentive. "Denise," he said. "Corbin." She had not prepared what she was going to say. She had driven here on something that felt like impulse but wasn't quite. "I'd like to talk to you." He considered this for a moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee, and something else she couldn't identify, feed or equipment oil, or just the particular smell of a working farm that had seeped into the walls over decades. A woman was at the table with an open laptop and a legal pad. She looked up when Denise came in, and her expression was carefully neutral. "This is Nora Fitch," Corbin said. "She's filming a documentary. She's welcome to stay or step out your call." Denise looked at Nora. Nora looked at her. "She can stay," Denise said. She sat down across from Corbin at the kitchen table. Gus came and sniffed her knee and walked away. Corbin poured her coffee without asking, which was the same thing he had apparently done for Nora, and she found herself thinking that this was a man for whom hospitality was not performance but habit. "I owe you an apology," she said. She had not planned to say this. It came out of somewhere she hadn't looked at before. Not just for Tuesday, for the past 4 years. Corbin was quiet. "I told myself it was about the community," she said. "The quality of life, the development plan, all of it, and I believed that. But I also knew that what we were doing, the complaints, the petitions, was intended to make things difficult for you specifically. I knew that and I kept going anyway." She stopped. "I don't know how to fix it, but I needed to say it." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a crow called from the tree line. "I appreciate that," Corbin said. His voice was exactly as even as it always was, and she could not tell whether she had moved him at all. But an apology doesn't undo a harassment filing. "I know. And it doesn't change what the HOA is planning for this land." She looked at him directly. "I know that too. So what do you actually want, Denise?" She thought about it. She thought about it honestly, for perhaps the first time in a long time. "I want to stop," she said. "I want to find a way to stop, and I don't know what that looks like from your side." Corbin was quiet for a long moment. He looked out the window at the fields. He looked at his hands. "From my side," he said slowly, "it looks like the HOA withdrawing the Phase 2 development plans that include this property. It looks like a written agreement not to file further complaints or petitions. It looks like Rosalind Park and your attorney working out the terms of the harassment filing settlement." He paused. "And it looks like you understanding clearly and completely that this land is not for sale. Not now. Not at any price. Not ever." The last words landed in the kitchen, with a quiet finality that made Nora stop typing. Denise Calloway sat across the table from a man who had farmed his grandfather's land for 30 years and buried his wife in the soil of it, and raised his daughter in the smell of its seasons. And she finally understood, in a way she should have understood years ago, that there was no offer she could make that would reach the thing she had been trying to buy. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. "Okay." Nora Fitch looked at the two of them across the kitchen table and felt the specific gravity of a scene that was also a resolution, of a conflict arriving at its end not with explosion, but with the slower, harder work of recognition. She thought about what she would say in the narration over this footage. She thought about what words she would use for what Denise Calloway was doing in that moment. The word that came to her was surrender, but that wasn't quite right. Surrender implied defeat, and this felt more like something else. More like a person finally looking at what they'd been doing from outside themselves, and finding they couldn't quite defend it anymore. She would spend a long time in the editing room with this scene. She would come back to it again and again. Outside the window, the October farm was quiet and vast, and the late afternoon sun lay across the bare fields in long gold bands, and the land simply continued being what it had always been, indifferent to the human drama conducted on its surface, patient in the way that only very old things can afford to be patient. Corbin Hale picked up his coffee cup and looked out the window and thought about the cover crop that still needed to go in before the ground froze, and the tractor waiting in the barn, and the long winter ahead, and the spring that would come after it, as it always did, reliable as anything he had ever known.